He had everything. A downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a car most people only saw in magazines, a social circle that toasted him at every rooftop party. But behind the curated Instagram life was a man who had wrapped his identity around one thing: success. His name was Michael. By 36, he was the founder of a tech startup valued at 8 figures. To the world, he was unstoppable, untouchable, unbreakable, until one day, he broke. It wasn't sudden, not a dramatic crash. It was quieter, slower, like water leaking into a foundation. Investors pulled out, contracts dissolved, bills mounted. And then the one thing he thought would never happen, happened. He lost it all: the money, the team, the status, and then the marriage. Most people saw the headlines. Some sent texts, few were called. Eventually, the notifications stopped altogether. Michael found himself alone in a room with no furniture, staring at a city that no longer felt like his. But what he didn't know, what none of us ever do when we're in the middle of falling, is that sometimes hitting the bottom is where you start building something real. This is the story of how one man lost everything and found something far more valuable: purpose. It all started unraveling faster than he expected. First came the drop in revenue. Then the investors began asking questions, the kind of questions that don't come with easy answers. Within weeks, one of his major backers pulled out. The others followed. In boardrooms, he went from being called brilliant to being called reckless. The very people who once cheered his ideas now avoided eye contact. His team tried to hold on, but the cracks were too deep. One Friday afternoon, Michael walked out of his office carrying a box. The logo he had once paid a designer $10,000 to perfect was printed on it. The irony wasn't lost on him. He thought going home might bring some sense of stability, but home wasn't a home anymore. His wife, tired of the late nights, the distance, and now the financial stress, had left. The apartment, once full of celebration and noise, now echoed with silence. At night, he lay on the floor of the living room, surrounded by empty boxes and unopened mail. Sometimes he stared at the ceiling for hours. Other times, he just scrolled through job listings he knew he wasn't ready to take. He stopped checking his email. He ignored calls from friends. He shut down his social media accounts. He told himself he just needed time. But deep down, he felt something heavier. He wasn't just grieving a company or a lifestyle. He was grieving a version of himself he no longer recognized. And when that grief settled in, the emptiness came next. Days turned into weeks. Michael stopped counting them. He stopped counting anything. The rent payments, the unopened emails, the seconds between each cup of coffee he didn't finish. Mornings were the worst. The sun would rise, but nothing inside him moved. He would sit on the edge of the bed for an hour, just staring at the floor. People talk about rock bottom like it's loud, but for Michael, it was quiet. Quiet in a way that made everything else feel far away. There was no screaming, no anger, just silence. He tried going for walks, but the city felt colder than he remembered. The coffee shops, the startup offices, the crosswalks full of people with purpose. It all felt like a movie he no longer had a part in. One evening, he passed a man sitting on a bench. Weathered jacket, beard that had given up being trimmed. A cardboard sign leaned against his leg, unreadable in the fading light. The man was reading a book. Michael stopped. Not because of the sign, not because he wanted to give money, but because he hadn't seen someone look so present in weeks. He asked, almost without thinking, "Why are you still reading, man? You've got nothing." The man didn't look up. He just turned a page and said calmly, "Because I still have me." That sentence hit Michael harder than any business loss ever had. He didn't reply. He just stood there for a moment, then walked home with something new lingering inside him. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something, a crack in the numbness. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because of stress or fear. That had become normal. But because of the sentence, because I still have me. It repeated in his mind like a song he didn't know he had memorized. He sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by dishes he hadn't touched in days, and opened his laptop. Not to scroll, not to job hunt, to write. He started typing, unsure what the point was. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a pitch deck, just thoughts. Raw ones. He wrote about failure. He wrote about waking up with no reason to wake up. He wrote about watching the world move on without him. No filters, no hashtags, just truth. It felt good to put the weight somewhere. The next night, he did it again, and again the night after. A few days later, on a whim, he posted one of the pieces on a small online forum for burned-out entrepreneurs. No name, no links, just words. The post got dozens of replies. Some were simple. I feel this. Others were heartbreaking. You just described my last 6 months. A few said thank you. Michael read every comment, twice. For the first time in months, he felt something that wasn't shame or regret. He felt seen. And strangely, in helping strangers feel understood, he started to understand himself again. There was no applause, no revenue spike, no email from an investor saying they had made a mistake. But something had shifted. He had stopped trying to fix his old life and started telling the truth about his new one. Michael kept writing. Every evening, he returned to the same spot at the kitchen table. The lights dim, the world quiet, and for the first time in years, so was his mind. He didn't write to impress. He didn't even call it content. There were no titles, no strategies, no goals, just truth. Some nights he shared his writing, some nights he didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he showed up, for himself. As weeks passed, people started reaching out. Not a flood, just one message at a time. A single parent in Texas, a laid-off engineer from Boston, a college dropout from Oregon. They all said the same thing. I thought I was the only one. He began to respond, not with advice, just presence. He didn't try to fix anyone's problems, he just listened. Sometimes, that was enough. Then someone suggested he start a blog. So he did. He called it the Empty Wallet Journal. There was no logo, no monetization, just a plain page with words that hurt and healed at the same time. People started sharing the posts. Quietly, organically, no ads, no growth hacks, and slowly a community formed. Not around Michael as a person, but around the idea that being broken didn't mean being done. For the first time in his adult life, he was building something not with strategy, but with sincerity. And it worked. Not in the way his past self would have measured it. No viral charts, no investor decks, no Forbes articles, but in the way that mattered. He was waking up with purpose. He was building connection. He was becoming someone he actually liked. One morning, about a year after everything fell apart, Michael woke up before his alarm. There was no meeting to prepare for, no pitch to rehearse, no inbox full of pressure. Just sunlight spilling across the floor, a notebook, and peace. He sat with his coffee, opened his laptop, and began writing, like he did every morning. But that day, something felt different. He wasn't writing from pain anymore. He was writing from presence. The words flowed more gently now, less like a cry for help, more like a conversation. Not with the world, but with the part of himself he had abandoned back when life was all about growth charts and networking events. That afternoon, he got an email from someone in another country. The subject line said, "You saved my life." The message was long. A father who had lost his job and almost lost himself. He had found one of Michael's posts late at night and held onto it like a lifeline. He wrote that it gave him the strength to stay, to try, to begin again. Michael sat in silence for a long time after reading it. He realized then that he had built something again. Not a company, not a brand, but a purpose. He used to measure success in numbers. Now he measured it in moments like this. Quiet, unseen, but deeply real. And for the first time since the collapse, he said something out loud, softly but clearly. I didn't lose everything. I lost what didn't matter. Maybe this story reminded you of someone you used to be, or someone you're afraid you might become. Maybe you've built a life that looks great on the outside, but inside, something's missing. Here's what Michael learned. Sometimes it takes losing what you thought mattered to find what truly does. Sometimes the version of you that fails is just clearing space for the version that can finally breathe. And maybe, just maybe, you're not starting over. You're starting real. If this story spoke to something inside you, take a moment. Sit with it, and when you're ready, subscribe to Awakened Wisdom. We share true stories like this every week. Stories not of perfection, but of progress. Stories not of having it all, but of finding what matters most when everything else is gone. Because the next story might not be about someone else. It might be about you.